The rain in Seattle didn't just fall. It pounded against the thin glass of the apartment window like it was trying to break in. Kamsi stood in the middle of the tiny living room, her hands shaking so hard she had to grip the back of a plastic chair just to stay upright. The air in the room smelled like bleach and old soup, a scent that always made her want to gag. On the couch, her mother was huddled under 3 thin blankets, her chest moving in short, wet gasps. Every breath sounded like a struggle, like she was trying to suck air through a pinch straw. "I told you, Kamsi," a man's voice boomed from the doorway. "Time up, you don't have the money, you don't have the room, simple as that." Kamsi turned to face the landlord, Mr. Henderson. He wasn't alone. 2 guys stood behind him, wearing heavy leather jackets and expressions that said they wouldn't mind breaking something. One of them, a guy with a buzzed head and a scar running through his eyebrow, stepped forward and kicked a stack of Kamsi's textbooks. The books skidded across the floor, the pages tearing. "Please," Kamsi whispered. Her throat felt like it was full of sand. "My mom can't move, look at her. If you put her out in that rain, she'll die before you even get her to the sidewalk. Just 1 more week. I'll find the money, I'll do anything." Mr. Henderson spat on the floor. "You've been saying that for 3 months, kid. You're a dropout with a waitressing job that barely pays for the bus. You ain't finding shit." He nodded to the man with the scar. "Clear the place, start with the couch." The big man stepped toward her mother. Kamsi lunged forward, throwing herself in front of the couch. "Don't you fucking touch her," she screamed, her voice cracking. "I'll kill you, I swear to God." The man laughed, a dry, mean sound. He reached out and grabbed Kamsi's arm, his fingers digging into her skin like iron claws. He started to pull her away, and Kamsi fought, scratching at his hands, but she was too small. He was about to toss her aside when the second man, who had been quiet until now, held up his phone. "Wait," the second man said. "The boss called. He says he wants to see the girl." Mr. Henderson frowned, looking confused. "The boss? You mean Han? Why the hell would he want to see a brat like this?" He didn't say why, he just said to bring her to the office. Now. The man with the scar let go of Kamsi's arm so fast she fell to her knees. He looked down at her, his eyes cold. "You're lucky, girl, or maybe you're not. Han Seung-jun isn't a man who likes to wait. Get your coat. We're going for a ride." Kamsi looked at her mother, who was barely conscious, then back at the men. She didn't know who Han was, but she knew the name. Everyone in this part of the city knew the name. He was the man who owned the debt, the man who owned the police, and the man who owned the very air they breathed. If you're feeling the heat of this moment, make sure to hit that like button right now. It helps the algorithm push this story out so more people can see Kamsi's struggle. I also want to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And listen closely. If you don't hit that subscribe button for Afro-Korean Love FM, you're leaving Kamsi to face the most dangerous man in Seattle all alone. Don't let her walk into that lion's den without your support. Subscribe now and make sure she isn't forgotten. The car they put her in was a black Mercedes that felt like a tomb. It was too quiet, the leather seats too soft, the heater blowing air that felt too dry. Kamsi sat in the back between the 2 heavies, staring out at the blurred neon lights of the city. She felt like a lamb being driven to a slaughterhouse. She didn't have her phone, she didn't have her purse. All she had was the damp hoodie on her back and the fear sitting like a lead weight in her stomach. They pulled up to a glass skyscraper that reached into the clouds. It was the kind of building Kamsi used to look at from the bus and wonder what kind of people worked inside. Now she knew, people like Han Seung-jun. They led her through a lobby that was all marble and silence, then into an elevator that moved so fast her ears popped. When the doors opened, she was pushed into a massive office. One wall was nothing but glass, showing the rainy city below. In front of that glass sat a man behind a desk made of dark, polished wood. He didn't look like a thug, he looked like a king. He was older, maybe in his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair swept back perfectly. His suit looked like it cost more than Kamsi's entire life. He was reading a file, a pair of thin glasses perched on his nose. He didn't look up when she entered. "Sit down," he said. His voice was deep, like the rumble of an engine. Kamsi stayed standing. Her legs were shaking, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her collapse. "Where's my mom? What did you do with the men at my house?" Han Seung-jun finally looked up. His eyes were dark and sharp, like 2 pieces of flint. He took off his glasses and set them on the desk. Your mother is still in that dump you call an apartment. My men are waiting outside. If I don't call them in the next 10 minutes, they will put her on the street. And based on the medical reports I'm looking at, she won't last an hour in this weather. Kamsi felt the air leave her lungs. You have her medical reports? How? I have everything, Kamsi. I know you dropped out of the University of Washington because you couldn't pay the tuition and take care of her at the same time. I know you owe $40,000 to people who aren't as patient as I am, and I know you're desperate. What do you want? She spat, her anger finally bubbling over the fear. You want the money? I don't have it. Take the apartment, take the shitty furniture, but leave my mom alone. Han leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his stomach. He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on her face. Kamsi felt dirty, like he was looking at a piece of meat he was thinking about buying. I don't care about your $40,000, he said calmly. That's pocket change to me. I'm looking for something else. I'm running for a seat in the Senate. The polls say I'm doing well, but the public, they think I'm too cold, too disconnected. They say a man who has never been married can't understand the needs of the people. Kamsi frowned. What does that have to do with me? I need a wife, Han said, but not just any wife. I need someone who looks like a story, a young, bright girl from a struggling background, someone I saved. Someone who will stand by me and look grateful. Someone who will do exactly what I say when I say it. Kamsi stared at him. She wanted to laugh, but her throat was too tight. You're kidding. You're old enough to be my father. Older, maybe. You want me to marry you for some fucking election. I want you to be my wife for 2 years, Han corrected, his voice never rising. In exchange, I will move your mother to the best private hospital in the state. I will pay for her surgery. I will clear all your debts. And when the 2 years are over, I will give you $1 million to start whatever life you want. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a contract. Or, he continued, you can walk out that door. My men will toss your mother into the rain, and you can watch her die tonight. The choice is yours, Kamsi, but I suggest you decide quickly. I have a dinner meeting in 20 minutes. Kamsi looked at the paper, then at the man. He wasn't smiling. There was no kindness in his face, only a cold, hard calculation. He was offering her a miracle and a prison at the same time. She thought of her mother's wet, struggling gasps. She thought of the man with the scar. You're a monster, she whispered. Han Seung-jun picked up his glasses and put them back on. I'm a businessman, and right now, I'm the only friend you have. Are you going to sign, or should I make the call to clear the apartment? Kamsi reached for the pen on the desk. Her hand was trembling so much she almost dropped it. She looked at the line at the bottom of the page. This was it. This was the moment she sold her soul to the devil to save the only person she loved. 2 years, she said, her voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. And you stay away from my mom. She gets the best doctors, you swear. My word is better than a swear, Han said, watching her intently. Sign it. Kamsi pressed the pen to the paper. The ink looked like blood against the white page. She scribbled her name, the letters jagged and ugly. As soon as she finished, Han pulled the paper back and tucked it into a drawer. He didn't offer her a smile or a hand to shake. Good, he said. Go to the waiting room. A woman named Minna will take you to a hotel. You'll be fitted for a new wardrobe tomorrow. We're getting married on Saturday. Saturday, Kamsi gasped. That's 3 days from now. I don't like to waste time, Han said, already looking back down at his files. Now get out. You smell like a hospital and it's bothering me. Kamsi stumbled out of the office, her head spinning. The woman in the hallway, Minna, was dressed in a sharp gray suit and had a face that looked like it was made of stone. She didn't say a word as she led Kamsi back to the elevator. The hotel was a penthouse suite that was bigger than Kamsi's entire apartment building. It was filled with white roses and expensive furniture, but it felt colder than the rain outside. Minna showed her the bedroom and told her a bath had been drawn. Mr. Han expects you to be ready by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, Minna said, her voice flat. Do not be late. Kamsi shut the door and leaned against it. She was alone in this palace of glass and gold. She walked over to the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, her mother was being moved to a hospital. Somewhere out there, her old life was ending. She caught her reflection in the glass. She looked small, tired, and messy. Her dark skin looked dull under the bright lights, and her hair was a frizzled mess from the rain. She looked like a girl who had lost everything. She went into the bathroom and stared at the tub. The water was steaming, smelling like lavender and expensive oils. She stripped off her clothes, throwing the damp, cheap fabric onto the marble floor. As she stepped into the hot water, she finally let out a sob. It was a jagged, ugly sound that echoed off the tiles. She stayed in the water until her skin was pruned, trying to wash away the feeling of Han's eyes on her. But no matter how much soap she used, she still felt like she was covered in something she couldn't scrub off. The next morning, the sun was trying to peek through the clouds, but the city still felt gray. There was a knock on the door at exactly 7:30. Kamsi opened it to find Minna and 3 other women carrying bags and boxes. "Time to get to work," Minna said. For the next 4 hours, Kamsi was poked, prodded, and scrubbed. They waxed her skin, they polished her nails, and they spent 2 hours working on her hair until it was a smooth, elegant crown on her head. Then came the clothes. They brought out dresses that cost more than she used to make in a year. Silk, lace, velvet. Everything was designed to make her look like a princess. But when Kamsi looked in the mirror, she didn't see a princess. She saw a doll. A very expensive, very pretty doll that belonged to Han Seung-jun. "Mr. Han is waiting downstairs," Minna said, handing Kamsi a small, silver clutch bag. "We are going to the jeweler's." The ride to the jeweler's was just as silent as the ride the night before. Han was already there, sitting in a private room with a tray of diamonds in front of him. He didn't get up when Kamsi walked in. He just looked her over, his eyes stopping on the way the silk of her green dress hugged her curves. "Better," he murmured. He pointed to a ring on the tray. It was a diamond so big it looked fake. "Put that on." Kamsi took the ring. It felt heavy and cold. She slid it onto her finger and it fit perfectly. It felt like a handcuff. "It's beautiful," the jeweler whispered, his voice shaking with fake excitement. "A perfect match for the lady." "It'll do," Han said. He stood up and looked at Kamsi. "We're going to lunch. There will be photographers. You will smile. You will hold my arm. If you look like you've been crying, I will have the doctors stop your mother's treatment. Do you understand?" Kamsi felt a flash of pure, white-hot rage. She wanted to spit in his face. She wanted to scream that he couldn't do this. But she knew he could. He was the one with the power, and she was the one with the debt. "I understand," she said, her voice tight. "Good girl," Han said, and for the first time he reached out and touched her. He ran a thumb along her jawline, his skin dry and rough. Kamsi flinched, but he didn't let go. He leaned in close, his breath smelling like peppermint and expensive tobacco. "Remember, Kamsi, you're an actress now. Make sure you give a good performance." He led her out of the shop and onto the sidewalk. Immediately, the flashes started. Men with cameras were everywhere, shouting questions. Kamsi felt blinded, her heart racing like a trapped bird. Han leaned into her, his arm wrapping firmly around her waist. To the cameras, it looked like a loving embrace. To Kamsi, it felt like she was being held in a vice. "Smile, Kamsi," he whispered in her ear. She forced her lips to curve upward. She looked into the cameras and pretended she was the luckiest girl in the world. She pretended she wasn't terrified. She pretended she didn't hate the man holding her. But inside, she was screaming. They sat in a restaurant that was so quiet you could hear the bubbles in the champagne. Han ordered for both of them, choosing dishes Kamsi had never even heard of. He talked to her like they were on a real date, asking about her favorite books and her childhood in Lagos before she moved to the States. "I don't want to talk to you," Kamsi said as soon as the waiter was out of earshot. "I did what you wanted. The pictures are taken. Can we just stop the act?" Han cut into his steak, his movements precise. "The act never stops, Kamsi. There are microphones in this room. There are people watching us from other tables. You need to learn that in my world there is no off switch." "How can you live like this?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Knowing everyone hates you, knowing everything is a lie." Han looked at her, and for a second the mask slipped. He looked tired, not soft but old. "Everyone hates everyone, Kamsi. Some people are just better at hiding it. And as for the lies, the only truth that matters is power. I have it. You don't. That's the only thing that's real." "My mom is real," Kamsi said. "Is she?" Han asked. "To me, she's just a line on a ledger. a cost I'm willing to pay to get what I want. Don't make the mistake of thinking I care about her life or yours. I care about the election. If you help me win, you get your reward. If you get in my way, I'll crush you like a bug on the windshield. He said it so casually, like he was talking about the weather. Kamsi looked down at her plate. The food looked delicious, but she felt like if she took a bite, she would choke. What happens after the 2 years? She asked. You just let me go. I keep my promises, Han said. I'll give you the money and a new identity if you want one. You can take your mother and go anywhere in the world. But until then, you are mine. You eat when I say, you sleep when I say, and you play the part of the devoted wife. He reached across the table and took her hand. His grip was firm, not letting her pull away. Now, he said, his voice dropping an octave. Tell me you love me, loud enough for the table behind us to hear. Kamsi felt the bile rise in her throat. She looked at him, seeing the wrinkles around his eyes and the coldness in his soul. She thought of her mother. I love you, Seung-jun, she said, the words tasting like poison. Again, he commanded, with more feeling. Kamsi took a shaky breath. She leaned forward, her eyes locked onto his. I love you. I don't know what I'd do without you. Han smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who had just won a bet. Perfect. You're going to be a star, Kamsi. The rest of the day was a blur of meetings and more photos. By the time they got back to the hotel, Kamsi was exhausted. Her feet ached from the heels, and her face felt stiff from the fake smiling. She went straight to her room, but as she was about to close the door, Han appeared in the hallway. He had loosened his tie and unbuttoned the top of his shirt. He looked less like a politician and more like the dangerous man he really was. The wedding is at my estate, he said. We're leaving at dawn, be ready. I will, Kamsi said, trying to shut the door. He put a hand on the frame, stopping her. He leaned in, his shadow falling over her. Don't think about running, Kamsi. My men are at the hospital. One word from me and they pull the plug. Do we have an agreement? We have an agreement, she whispered. He stared at her for a long moment, his gaze intense. Then he reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers were cold. Good night, Kamsi, he said. He walked away, and Kamsi finally slammed the door and locked it. She sank to the floor, her heart thudding against her ribs. She was 3 days away from marrying a man she loathed. She was 3 days away from becoming a ghost in a gold cage. She crawled into the massive bed, but she didn't sleep. She stayed awake, watching the rain hit the window, wondering if her mother was okay, wondering if she would ever feel like a real person again. The morning of the wedding was cold and foggy. They drove 2 hours out of the city to a massive estate hidden behind high stone walls. The house was a masterpiece of black stone and glass, surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens that looked like they belonged in a magazine. Minna was there again, ready with the dress. It was a white lace gown that looked like it belonged to a queen. It was beautiful, and Kamsi hated it. As she stood in front of the mirror, fully dressed, she felt like she was watching her own funeral. There were no friends there, no family. Just Han's staff and the photographers who were already setting up in the garden. It's time, Minna said. Kamsi walked out of the room and down the grand staircase. At the bottom stood Han. He was wearing a black tuxedo, looking sharp and terrifying. He held out his hand to her. Ready to make history? He asked. Kamsi didn't answer, she just took his hand. The ceremony was short and cold. The priest said words about love and honor that felt like a joke. Kamsi said, I do, when she was told to. When Han leaned in to kiss her, she kept her eyes open. His lips were dry and firm. It wasn't a kiss of passion, it was a kiss of ownership. Afterward, there was a reception with hundreds of people Kamsi didn't know. Men in suits and women in diamonds, all of them smiling and congratulating them. Kamsi felt like she was drowning in a sea of fake faces. You're doing well, Han whispered as they moved through the crowd. Keep it up. By the time the sun went down, the guests were gone. The house was quiet again, the only sound the wind whistling through the trees. Kamsi stood on the balcony of the master bedroom, looking out at the dark gardens. She heard the door open behind her. She didn't turn around, she knew who it was. The photographers are gone, Kamsi, Han said. His voice was closer now. You can stop the smiling. I already did, she said, her voice flat. She felt him step up behind her. He didn't touch her, but she could feel the heat radiating off him. "This is your home now," he said. "My home is your home. Everything I have belongs to you." "Except my freedom," she said. "Freedom is overrated," Han replied. He reached out and grabbed her shoulder, turning her to face him. He looked down at her, his eyes dark with something she couldn't name. "You have safety. You have wealth. You have the best medical care for your mother. Most people would kill for what you have. Most people aren't married to a man who threatens to kill their mother every 5 minutes," Kamsi snapped. Han's grip tightened. "I don't make threats, Kamsi. I state facts. As long as you play your part, everyone stays safe. That's the deal." He leaned in, his face inches from hers. "Now, go to bed. I have a lot of work to do, and I don't want to be disturbed." He let go of her and walked out of the room, shutting the door behind him. Kamsi stood on the balcony for a long time, the cold wind biting at her skin. She was married. She was a Han now. And the nightmare was only just beginning. The sun didn't feel warm when it hit the floor of the master bedroom the next morning. It was just bright, a sharp white light that made Kamsi's head ache. She had stayed on her side of the bed all night, wrapped in the expensive silk sheets that felt too slippery against her skin. Han hadn't come back to the room. She didn't know if he had slept in another part of the house or if he had worked through the night, and she didn't care. As long as he wasn't near her, she could breathe. She sat up and looked around the room. It was huge, filled with furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. There were no photos on the walls, no books on the nightstands. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a hotel suite for someone who never intended to stay long. There was a light tap on the door before it swung open. Minna walked in, carrying a tray with a silver coffee pot and a single white rose. Behind her were 2 other women she hadn't seen before. They were carrying garment bags. "Good morning, Mrs. Han," Minna said. Her voice was as dry as paper. Kamsi winced at the name. "It's Kamsi, just Kamsi." "Mr. Han prefers Mrs. Han when staff are present," Minna replied, setting the tray down on a low table. "He is waiting for you in the dining room. You have 20 minutes to dress. We have a full schedule today." "I want to see my mother," Kamsi said, swinging her legs out of bed. "He promised she'd be in a hospital. I want to see her with my own eyes." "The visit is scheduled for 11 o'clock, Minna said, gesturing for the other women to step forward. "But only if you are ready on time. Mr. Han does not like to be kept waiting." Kamsi felt a spark of anger, but she pushed it down. She was a prisoner, and she knew it. She let the women lead her into the walk-in closet, which was the size of her old bedroom. They picked out a cream-colored wool dress that fit her perfectly and a pair of heels that made her legs look long but felt like torture devices. They brushed her hair until it shone and applied a layer of makeup that made her look older, more sophisticated. When she walked into the dining room, Han was sitting at the head of a table that could easily seat 20 people. He was wearing a gray suit today, looking over a tablet while he sipped black coffee. He didn't look up when she sat down. "Eat," he said. Kamsi looked at the plate in front of her. Poached eggs, avocado, and smoked salmon. It was beautiful, but she wasn't hungry. "I want to talk about my mom." Han set the tablet down and looked at her. His eyes were heavy, like he hadn't slept, but they were still sharp. "The doctors at the clinic say she survived the night. She's stable, but she needs surgery on her lungs. It's expensive, and the recovery will be long." "You said you'd pay for it," Kamsi reminded him, her voice trembling. "And I will," Han said. "The paperwork is already being handled. But you need to understand something, Kamsi. My money buys her life. Your behavior buys my money. If you give me trouble today, if you look miserable in front of the people we are meeting, the payments stop. It's a simple machine. You turn the crank, the money comes out. You stop, the machine stops." Kamsi gripped her fork so hard her knuckles turned white. "You really are a piece of work, aren't you? You talk about her life like it's a business deal." "Everything is a business deal," Han said, finally taking a bite of his food. "The sooner you learn that, the easier your life will be. After breakfast, we are going to the hospital. You will have 30 minutes with her. Then we have a luncheon with the head of the teachers' union. You will sit by me, you will smile, and you will tell them how much you admire my commitment to the community." "I don't know anything about your commitment to the community," Kamsi said. "I only know you as a guy who takes people's houses." Han leaned forward, his face darkening. "Then you better start learning. My team will give you a briefing in the car. Read it, memorize it. If I ask you a question in front of them and you give the wrong answer, there will be consequences." Kamsi looked away, staring out the window at the gray Seattle sky. She felt like she was being erased. Bit by bit, the girl who wanted to be a nurse, the girl who loved Lagos music and cheap tacos, was being covered up by this fake version of herself. The hospital Han had chosen was tucked away in a quiet, wealthy neighborhood. It looked more like a spa than a place for sick people. There were fountains in the lobby and original paintings on the walls. It was the complete opposite of the crowded, state-run clinic where her mother had been before. They were led to a private suite on the top floor. 2 guards stood outside the door, nodding to Han as he approached. Han stopped and looked at Kamsi. 30 minutes, he said. I'll be in the waiting area. Don't try anything stupid. The windows don't open, and the guards have orders to stop you if you try to leave through the back. Kamsi didn't even look at him. She pushed past and went into the room. Her mother looked so small in the big hospital bed. She was hooked up to several machines, but the frantic, wet gasping was gone. She was sleeping peacefully, her skin looking a little less gray than it had the night before. Kamsi walked to the side of the bed and took her mother's hand. It was warm. She let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm here." Her mother's eyes fluttered open. She looked confused for a second, squinting at the bright, clean room. "Kamsi, where are we?" "It's a good place, Mom," Kamsi said, forcing a smile. "A special hospital. They're going to fix your lungs. You don't have to worry about the rent anymore. You don't have to worry about anything." Her mother looked at Kamsi, really looking at her. She saw the expensive dress, the heavy diamond ring, the perfect hair, her eyes filled with tears. "Kamsi, what did you do? How did we get here?" "I met someone," Kamsi said, her voice catching. "A man, he's rich, Mom, he wants to help us. We're married." "Married?" her mother gasped, trying to sit up. The machines started to beep, and Kamsi gently pushed her back down. "But you're so young. You were supposed to finish school. Who is this man? Why haven't I met him?" "His name is Han Seung-jun," Kamsi said. "He's a politician, he's older, but he's powerful. He can take care of you, that's all that matters." "Kamsi, look at me," her mother said, her voice weak but firm. "Are you happy? Did you do this for me?" Kamsi felt like her heart was being ripped in half. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell her mother the truth, that she was a prisoner, that the man outside was a monster, that she had sold her life so her mother wouldn't die on a sidewalk. But she couldn't. If her mother knew, she would refuse the treatment. She would rather die than see Kamsi like this. "I'm happy, Mom," Kamsi lied, the words feeling like shards of glass in her mouth. "He's a good man. He treats me like a queen. Look at this ring. He loves me." Her mother looked at the diamond, then back at Kamsi. She didn't look convinced, but she was too tired to argue. She reached up and touched Kamsi's cheek. "You were always my brave girl, but don't lose yourself for me, okay? You hear me?" "I won't, Mom," Kamsi whispered. "I promise." The door opened and Han stepped in. He looked at his watch. "Time up, Kamsi, we have to go." Kamsi's mother looked at Han, her eyes wide with fear and awe. Han walked over to the bed, putting on his public face, the one that looked kind and concerned. "Mrs. Johnson," Han said, bowing slightly, "it's an honor to finally meet you. I'm sorry we had to meet under these circumstances, but I promise you, you are in the best hands. Kamsi told me so much about you." Kamsi's mother looked at Han, then at Kamsi. "Thank you, Mr. Han, for helping my daughter." "She's my wife now," Han said, reaching out and sliding an arm around Kamsi's waist. He pulled her close, his fingers digging into her hip. "Her family is my family. Now we must let you rest. The doctors say you need quiet." He led Kamsi out of the room before she could say goodbye. As soon as the door closed, he dropped his arm and walked toward the elevator. "That was a nice touch," he said, his voice cold again. "The I'm happy part, you're a better liar than I thought." "I hate you," Kamsi said, her voice shaking with pure loathing. "Hate me all you want," Han said as the elevator doors opened. "As long as you keep lying like that, your mother stays in that bed. Now get in the car, we have people to impress." The rest of the day was a nightmare of handshakes and fake smiles. Kamsi sat through the luncheon, answering questions about her whirlwind romance with Han. She followed the script his team had given her, talking about how they met at a charity event and how she was moved by his vision for the city. The people at the table were all rich, all powerful, and all looked at Kamsi like she was a shiny new toy Han had bought. They didn't see her as a person. They saw her as a political asset. "She's charming," Seung-jun, an older man with a thick gold watch said, patting Han on the shoulder. "The younger voters will love her, a real Cinderella story." "She's the light of my life," Han said, looking at Kamsi with a look that almost looked like love. It made her skin crawl. By the time they got back to the estate, the sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows over the gardens. Kamsi went straight to the kitchen. She was starving now, the stress having burned through whatever energy she had. She found the fridge filled with expensive food, but she didn't want any of it. She found a loaf of bread and some cheese and started making a sandwich. She was standing at the counter, her hair a mess, her expensive dress wrinkled, when Han walked in. He had taken off his jacket and vest, his white shirt rolled up at the sleeves. He looked at her, then at the sandwich. "The chef can make you whatever you want," he said. "I don't want the chef to make me anything," Kamsi said, taking a bite of the sandwich. "I want to do it myself. I want to feel like a real person for 5 minutes." Han walked over to the counter and leaned against it. He watched her eat, his gaze heavy. "You did well today. The union leader liked you. He's going to endorse me on Monday." "Yay for you," Kamsi said with her mouth full. Han reached out and took the sandwich from her hand. He set it down on the counter. "Hey," she yelled, "I was eating that." "Look at me," he commanded. Kamsi looked up at him. Up close, he was intimidating. He was much taller than her, his shoulders broad, his presence filling the room. He smelled like expensive cologne and something darker, something like old wood and steel. "You think this is a game," he said, his voice low. "You think you can just pout and make smart comments when we're alone, but you need to understand the world you just stepped into. My enemies don't just want to beat me in an election. They want to destroy me. And now that you're my wife, they want to destroy you too." "I'm already destroyed," Kamsi said, her eyes stinging. "You did that the moment you made me sign that paper." "No," Han said, stepping closer. He put his hands on the counter on either side of her, pinning her in. "You're alive. Your mother is alive. That's more than most people get. You're not a victim, Kamsi. You're a partner. And if you don't start acting like one, we're both going to end up in the ground." Kamsi felt her heart hammering against her ribs. He was so close she could feel the heat of his body. She wanted to push him away, but she felt paralyzed. "Why me?" she whispered. "You could have hired a professional. You could have found someone who actually wanted this." Han looked at her, his eyes tracing the lines of her face. "Because a professional can be bought by someone else. You have something to lose, you have a reason to stay loyal. And besides," he added, his voice dropping to a whisper, "I like the way you look at me. Even when you hate me, you're the only person in this city who doesn't look at me like I'm a paycheck." He reached out and ran a finger over her bottom lip. Kamsi froze. His touch was electric, a sharp jolt that made her stomach flip. She hated it. She hated him, but she couldn't look away. "Don't," she breathed. "Don't what?" he asked, his face moving closer to hers. "Don't touch my wife. Don't look at the woman I'm paying millions to keep." "I'm not yours," she said, but her voice had no strength. "The contract says otherwise," Han said. He leaned in, his lips brushing against her ear. "Go to sleep, Kamsi. We have a long day tomorrow, and don't bother locking the door. This is my house. I have the keys to everything." He let go of her and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing there, shaking and confused. She looked at the sandwich on the counter, but she wasn't hungry anymore. She went back to the master bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at the diamond on her finger. It felt like it was getting heavier. She realized then that she wasn't just afraid of Han. She was afraid of herself. She was afraid of the way her body reacted to him, the way her heart sped up when he got close. She was supposed to hate him. He was the man who had ruined her life. But as she lay down in the dark, listening to the wind outside, she couldn't stop thinking about the way his finger had felt on her lip. She couldn't stop thinking about the look in his eyes, a look that wasn't just about business. She was in a cage, but the bars weren't just made of money and threats. They were made of something much more dangerous. The next week was a blur of activity. Han was always there, always pushing her. They went to fundraisers, to rallies, to dinners with people who made Kamsi's skin crawl. She learned to speak their language, to laugh at their jokes, to play the part of the devoted young wife. She saw her mother every 2 days. Her mother was getting better, moving to a rehab center within the hospital. She was happy, and that was the only thing that kept Kamsi going. But at night, the silence of the estate was deafening. Han rarely spoke to her when they were alone. He was always working, always on the phone, always planning. Yet he was always watching her. She would catch him staring at her across the room, his expression unreadable. One night, it started to snow. Huge, white flakes covered the gardens, turning the world into a silent, white wasteland. Kamsi was in the library, looking for something to read, when Han walked in. He looked stressed. His tie was gone, his hair was messy, and he was carrying a glass of whiskey. "The polls are out," he said, sitting down in a leather armchair. "I'm up by 5 points." "Congratulations," Kamsi said, not looking up from a book. "It's because of you," he said. "The young family angle is working. People like the way you look at me. They think it's real." "I'm a good actress," Kamsi said. Han didn't say anything for a long time. He just sat there, sipping his drink, watching the snow fall. "I grew up in a place like the one you lived in," he said suddenly. Kamsi looked up, surprised. He never talked about his past. "My father was a drunk," Han continued, his voice low. "He lost everything. We were evicted when I was 10. I watched my mother die in a shelter because we couldn't afford medicine. I swore then that I would never be poor again. I swore I would be the one holding the keys." "So you became a loan shark?" Kamsi asked. "You became the person who did that to other people." Han looked at her, his eyes cold. "I became the person who survived. There are 2 kinds of people in this world, Kamsi. Those who take and those who are taken from. I decided which one I was going to be a long time ago." "You don't have to be a monster to survive," Kamsi said. "Don't I?" Han asked. He stood up and walked over to her. He took the book out of her hands and set it on the table. "You think you're better than me because you're innocent. But you're here, aren't you? You're wearing my diamonds, you're living in my house. You sold yourself to save someone else. That's not innocence, Kamsi. That's a choice, just like the ones I made." He reached out and cupped her face in his hands. His palms were warm, his touch surprisingly gentle. "We're the same," he whispered. "We both do what we have to do. We both carry the weight of our choices. You don't have to hate me for it." Kamsi felt a tear slip down her cheek. "I have to hate you. If I don't hate you, I don't have anything left." Han wiped the tear away with his thumb. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her, his gaze intense and burning. And then he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't like the kiss at the wedding. It wasn't for the cameras. It was hard, desperate, and full of a dark hunger that terrified Kamsi. She tried to pull away, but he held her firm, his fingers tangling in her hair. She fought him for a second, then her strength failed. She let out a soft moan and kissed him back, her hands reaching up to grip his shirt. She hated him, she loathed him, but in that moment, in the middle of the cold, snowy night, he was the only thing that felt real. He pulled back, his breath coming in short, jagged gasps. He looked at her, his eyes dark with a mix of desire and something that looked almost like regret. "You're not a puppet, Kamsi," he whispered. "And I'm not a monster. We're just 2 people trying to stay alive in a world that wants to kill us." He let go of her and walked out of the library, leaving her standing there in the silence, her lips tingling and her heart racing. She looked out at the snow. The world was white and clean, but she knew what lay beneath it. She knew the dirt and the cold. She was no longer just a girl in a cage. She was a woman caught in a storm, and she didn't know if she would ever find her way out. Kamsi stood at the bathroom sink, scrubbing her mouth with a damp washcloth until her lips felt raw and swollen. The image of Han's dark eyes, inches from her own, wouldn't leave her mind. She hated the way she had melted into him. She hated that for a split second, she had forgotten he was her captor and had only felt the heat of his body against the winter chill. The library was empty now, the smell of his whiskey and peppermint still hanging in the air like a ghost. Outside, the snow was piling up against the glass, burying the world in a silent, white grave. She looked at her reflection. Her eyes were wide and bloodshot, her dark skin looking pale under the harsh vanity lights. She looked like a girl who was losing a war. Every time she thought she had a handle on her hatred, Han did something to pull the rug out from under her. He wasn't just a loan shark or a politician anymore. He was a parasite, digging into her brain, making her question everything she knew about herself. She wasn't supposed to feel that spark. She wasn't supposed to want to touch a man who used her mother's life as a bargaining chip. "Fuck," she whispered, leaning her forehead against the cold mirror. The glass was chilled from the storm outside, and it felt good against her skin. She stayed there for a long time, listening to the radiator hum and the distant sound of a door shutting somewhere deep in the house. She wondered if Han was sleeping, or if he was sitting in his office, planning his next move, calculating exactly how much that kiss would cost her. She realized then that she was more afraid of him when he was being gentle than when he was threatening her. The threats she could handle. The gentleness, that was what was going to destroy her. The next morning, the sun was so bright it was blinding, reflecting off the fresh snow like a million tiny mirrors. Kamsi found Han in the kitchen, dressed in a sharp black turtleneck and slacks. He was standing by the window, staring out at the white landscape, a cup of coffee in his hand. He didn't look like he had slept at all. When he heard her footsteps, he didn't turn around, but his shoulders stiffened just a fraction. The tension in the room was so thick Kamsi felt like she had to push through it just to get to the fridge. "The car will be here in an hour," Han said, his voice back to its usual cold, professional tone. It was like the library had never happened, like he hadn't held her face and told her they were the same. "We have a meeting with the city council. They're nervous about some of my past business coming to light. You need to be there to soften the image." Kamsi grabbed a carton of orange juice, refusing to look at him. "I thought my job was just to look pretty at dinners. Now I'm a shield for your criminal record." "Your job is whatever I tell you it is," Han said, finally turning to face her. His eyes were unreadable, but there was a hardness there that hadn't been there the night before. "And don't use that tone with me. Not today. We're walking into a room full of sharks, and if they see a single crack in us, they'll tear us apart. You stay close, you agree with everything I say, and you act like the luckiest woman on earth. Do you have that?" If you're feeling the tension between Kamsi and Han right now, do me a favor and hit that like button. It really helps the algorithm show these stories to more people who love this kind of gritty drama. I've been reading your comments, and I want to know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you actually trust Han Seung-jun? Is he really trying to protect her, or is he just the ultimate predator? Let me know your rating in the comments. And look, if you don't hit that subscribe button for Afro-Korean Love FM, you're basically leaving Kamsi to drown in this house of mirrors. Don't be the person who lets her get played. Subscribe now so you don't miss the moment she finally bites back. The meeting room was at the top of a different skyscraper, one that smelled like floor wax and old power. The men sitting around the table were all older, with expensive watches and eyes that didn't move when they spoke. They looked at Han with a mix of fear and respect, but they looked at Kamsi like she was a stain on the carpet. She could feel their judgment, a young, black girl from the wrong side of town, married to a man like Han. They thought she was a gold digger at best and a liability at worst. Han sat at the head of the table, his hand resting possessively on Kamsi's chair. He didn't introduce her as his wife, he introduced her as my better half, a phrase that made her want to vomit. For 2 hours, she sat there and listened to them talk about zoning laws, construction contracts, and cleaning up the streets. It was all code for making more money and pushing out people who looked just like Kamsi. "And what does the missus think about the new development in the South District?" one of the men asked, a guy named Miller who had a smile that didn't reach his watery blue eyes. He was leaning forward, clearly trying to trip her up. "I hear you lived near there before you met Seung-jun." Kamsi felt Han's hand tighten on the back of her chair. It was a warning. She looked Miller dead in the eye, her heart racing. She thought of her old neighborhood, the park where the swings were broken, the grocery store where the prices went up every week. She knew what this development meant. It meant high-rise condos that none of her friends could afford. "I think the South District needs a lot of things," Kamsi said, her voice steady. "But mostly, it needs people who actually care about the community, not just the profit margins. That's why I support my husband. He understands that you can't build a future by destroying the past." The room went silent. Han let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded more like a bark. "Well said, darling," he murmured. He looked at Miller, his gaze turning deadly. "Any other questions for my wife, or can we get back to the budget?" Miller backed down, but the look he gave Kamsi wasn't one of respect. It was one of pure, distilled hatred. She had embarrassed him, and in this world, that was a dangerous thing to do. When they finally got back to the car, Kamsi collapsed against the leather seat, her head spinning. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her feeling hollow and exhausted. Han was staring out the window, his jaw set. "That was stupid," he said after a long silence. "What?" Kamsi asked, looking at him. "I said what you wanted. I supported you." "You made an enemy out of Miller," Han snapped, turning to her. "He's the head of the planning committee. I need him. You don't walk into a room like that and lecture people like him about community. You play the part of the quiet, supportive wife. You don't think for yourself." "I'm not a fucking robot, Han," Kamsi yelled, the frustration finally boiling over. "I'm a human being. You took me out of my life, you're using me as a prop, and you expect me to just sit there while they talk about destroying the only place I ever called home? I won't do it." Han reached out and grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. His eyes were blazing. "You will do exactly what I tell you, or I will have your mother moved back to that shithole clinic tonight. Is that clear enough for you? You think you're being brave? You're being reckless. And in my world, reckless people get buried." He let go of her, pushing her away like she was something disgusting. Kamsi turned her head toward the window, tears of rage stinging her eyes. She wanted to open the door and jump out of the moving car. She wanted to run until her lungs burned and she couldn't remember his name. But she couldn't. The leash was too tight. The drive back to the estate felt like it lasted a lifetime. When they finally pulled through the gates, the sun was gone, replaced by a bruised purple sky. Han got out of the car without a word, slamming the door behind him. Kamsi waited for a minute, trying to stop her hands from shaking, before she followed him inside. The house felt colder than usual. She went to the kitchen to get some water, but as she walked past Han's office, she heard voices. Low, angry voices. She stopped, pressing her back against the wall, her heart hammering. "He's not going to let it go, Han," a man's voice said. It wasn't one of the guards. It sounded like Minna's brother or someone close to the organization. "Miller is talking to the opposition. He's going to leak the information about the girl's mother. The debt, the eviction, all of it. He's going to make it look like you kidnapped her." "Let him try," Han's voice growled. "I have the contracts, I have the marriage license. Everything is legal." "Legal doesn't matter in an election, and you know it. It's about the optics. If the public thinks you bought a black student to fix your reputation, you're finished. You need to get rid of the mother. Move her somewhere where she can't be found." Kamsi felt the world tilt. Her breath hitched, and she bit her lip to keep from making a sound. "No," Han said. "We keep her where she is. It's easier to control. Just increase the security. If anyone gets close to that hospital room, kill them. I don't care who it is." "And the girl?" the man asked. "She's a firebrand, Han. She's going to cause trouble. Maybe we should quiet her down for a while." There was a long pause. Kamsi held her breath, her eyes wide. "I'll handle Kamsi," Han said, his voice dropping to that low, dangerous register that made her skin crawl. "She's my responsibility. Just do what I told you. Get out." Kamsi scrambled away from the door, running down the hallway as quietly as she could. She didn't stop until she was in her room, the door locked behind her. She sank to the floor, her mind racing. They were talking about her like she was a piece of trash. They were talking about quieting her down. And Han was going to handle her. She realized then that the hospital wasn't just a place for her mother to get better. It was a prison. As long as her mother was there, Han had a gun to Kamsi's head. And if Miller leaked the truth, Han might decide that the gun was more trouble than it was worth. She had to get out. She had to find a way to get her mother and disappear. But how? She had no money, no phone, no car. She was trapped in a mansion surrounded by guards who answered only to Han. She walked over to the window. The snow was still falling, thick and heavy. She looked at the stone wall at the edge of the property. It looked 10 feet tall, topped with wrought iron spikes. Even if she climbed it, where would she go? The nearest town was miles away, and she'd freeze to death before she got there. A knock on the door made her jump. She scrambled to her feet, wiping her eyes. Kamsi opened the door. It was Han. "Go away," she shouted. "I'm tired, I'm going to sleep." "Open the door or I'll break it down," he said calmly. She knew he meant it. She walked over and turned the lock, stepping back as the door swung open. Han stood there, his coat off, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He looked exhausted, but there was a predatory energy about him that made Kamsi's pulse spike. He stepped into the room and shut the door behind him. He didn't say anything for a long time, just watched her. Kamsi stood her ground, though her knees were shaking. "I heard you," she said, her voice trembling. "I heard you talking to your guy. You're going to handle me. What does that mean, Han? Are you going to kill me too?" Han sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "You shouldn't have been listening, Kamsi. It's a bad habit." "Answer me," she screamed. "What are you going to do to my mom?" Han moved so fast she didn't even see it. He was across the room in a second, grabbing her arms and pinning her against the wall. His face was inches from hers, his eyes dark and full of a strange, twisted light. "I'm trying to save your life," he hissed. "You have no idea what's happening out there. Miller isn't just a politician, he's a butcher. If he gets his hands on you, he'll use you until there's nothing left, and then he'll toss your body in the Sound. I'm the only thing standing between you and a shallow grave." "You're the one who put me in this position," Kamsi shouted back, her face wet with tears. "You're the one who made me a target. I hate you. I wish I had let my mom die on the street instead of selling myself to a monster like you." Han's grip tightened until it hurt. He looked at her, his jaw working, his breath hot against her skin. For a second, she thought he was going to hit her. She closed her eyes, waiting for the blow. Instead, he kissed her. It wasn't like the kiss in the library. This was violent, desperate, and full of a dark, possessive rage. He tasted like whiskey and bitterness. Kamsi fought him, pounding her fists against his chest, but he didn't budge. He pressed his body against hers, pinning her to the wall, his hands moving into her hair to hold her head still. She let out a muffled sob against his lips, her strength failing. The fear and the anger and the weird, twisted attraction she felt for him all tangled together into a knot she couldn't break. Her hands stopped hitting him and gripped his shirt, pulling him closer. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. His eyes were wild. "You're mine, Kamsi," he whispered, his voice thick. "Do you understand? I don't care about the election. I don't care about Miller. I don't care about anything but keeping you. If I have to burn this city to the ground to keep you safe, I will." "Why?" she breathed, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Why do you care?" Han looked at her, and for the first time she saw a crack in the armor. She saw a man who was terrified, not of his enemies, but of the woman in his arms. "Because I can't let go," he said, his voice barely audible. "I've spent my whole life taking what I wanted, but you're the only thing I ever needed." He kissed her again, more gently this time, and Kamsi felt her world crumbling. She knew she should run. She knew she should fight. But in the middle of the storm, in the middle of the lies and the blood and the fear, his arms were the only place that felt like home. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. They stayed like that for a long time, tangled together in the dark room while the snow continued to bury the world outside. Han eventually let go of her, but he didn't leave. He sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. "Miller is going to move tomorrow," he said, his voice flat. "He's holding a press conference. He's going to bring out a girl who says she's your friend, someone who's going to say, 'I forced you into this.'" "Who?" Kamsi asked, sitting down next to him, though she kept a distance. "A girl named Sarah. You worked with her at the diner." Kamsi felt a pang in her chest. Sarah, they had been close. They had shared shifts and complained about customers and talked about their dreams. "Sarah wouldn't do that. She knows how much I love my mom." "Money talks, Kamsi," Han said. "Miller offered her enough to pay off her own debts. She's scared and she's being paid to lie. If she goes on TV, the police will have to investigate. They'll take you away. They'll take your mother away. And once you're out from under my protection, Miller will make sure you disappear." "So what do we do?" Kamsi asked. She felt cold, a deep chill that started in her bones. Han looked at her, his eyes hard again. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by the man who owned the city. "We get ahead of it. Tonight, we're going to do a live interview. Just us. We're going to tell our own story before Miller can tell his. And you're going to have to be the most convincing bride the world has ever seen." "I don't know if I can do that anymore," Kamsi said, looking at her hands. Han reached out and took her hand. His grip was firm but not painful. "You have to, for your mother, for yourself, and for me." Kamsi looked at him. She saw the lines around his eyes, the gray in his hair, the darkness in his soul. She knew she was dancing with the devil. but as she looked at him, she realized she didn't want to dance with anyone else. "Tell me what I have to do," she said. Han nodded. "Minna is bringing the cameras. They'll be here in an hour. We do it right here in the library. We make it look intimate. We make it look real." The library was set up with soft lights and a single camera. Kamsi was dressed in a simple, elegant blue dress, her hair pulled back. Han sat next to her on the leather sofa, his arm draped around the back of it. He looked calm, but she could see the pulse jumping in his neck. "Ready?" the cameraman asked. Han looked at Kamsi. "Just tell them how we met, tell them how I saved you, and tell them you love me." The red light on the camera blinked on. For the next 30 minutes, Kamsi gave the performance of her life. She talked about her struggle, her mother's illness, and how Han had stepped in when everyone else had turned their backs. She spoke with a passion that surprised even herself. She looked into the camera and told the world that Han Seung-jun was a man of honor, a man of heart. And when the interviewer asked her if she was happy, Kamsi turned to Han. She looked at him, seeing the man who had threatened her and the man who had kissed her, the man who was her prison and her only hope. "I've never felt safer," she said, and for a second she almost believed it. She leaned in and kissed him, a soft, lingering kiss that was caught by the camera and broadcast to the entire city. When the light finally went off, Kamsi pulled away, feeling like she was going to collapse. Her face was hot, and her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Was that enough?" she whispered. Han was staring at her, a look of pure shock on his face. He hadn't expected the kiss. He hadn't expected her to go that far. "It was perfect," he said, his voice husky. He stood up and dismissed the crew. As soon as the room was empty, he turned back to Kamsi. He reached out and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "You did it," he murmured into her hair. "You saved us." Kamsi didn't pull away. She leaned into him, closing her eyes. She knew the war wasn't over. She knew Miller would still come for them. She knew the lies would only get bigger and the stakes would only get higher. But for tonight, the storm was outside the walls. Inside, there was only the heat of the man who owned her, and the girl who was slowly realizing she might not want to be free after all. The next morning, the city was in an uproar. Kamsi's interview was everywhere. Social media was flooded with clips of the love-struck couple. The narrative had shifted. People were calling it a modern-day fairy tale. Miller's press conference had been canceled. The girl, Sarah, had reportedly disappeared. Kamsi sat at the breakfast table, watching the news on her tablet. She felt a strange sense of victory, but it was hollow. She had won, but at what cost? She was no longer Kamsi Johnson, the student, the daughter, the girl from Lagos. She was Mrs. Han, the political asset, the puppet. Han walked into the room, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him. He was whistling a low tune, a newspaper tucked under his arm. "Polls are up 10 points, he said, sitting down. "The city loves you, Kamsi. You're a star." "Is Sarah okay?" Kamsi asked, not looking up. Han's smile faltered. "She's fine. I had her moved to a different city. She has enough money to start over. She won't be a problem anymore." "You had her moved?" Kamsi asked, her voice rising. "You just took her. Does she have a choice?" "She had a choice to take Miller's money and destroy us," Han said, his voice hardening. "I gave her a better choice. Don't worry about her, Kamsi. She's better off than she was." "Everyone is better off, according to you," Kamsi spat, "as long as they do what you say." "That's how the world works," Han said. "Now, get ready. We're going to the hospital. Your mother is having her surgery today." The hospital was quiet, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic. Kamsi sat in the waiting room, her hands folded in her lap. Han sat next to her, his presence a constant, heavy weight. He didn't speak, but he didn't leave her side. The surgery took 4 hours. When the doctor finally came out, he was smiling. "It was a success," he said. "The damage was extensive, but we were able to repair the lungs. She'll need a few weeks of recovery, but she's going to live a long, healthy life." Kamsi burst into tears. She buried her face in her hands, the relief washing over her like a tidal wave. All the fear, all the stress, all the lies, it had been worth it. Her mother was going to be okay. She felt a hand on her shoulder. She looked up to see Han watching her. There was no coldness in his eyes now. There was something else, something soft, something that looked like pride. "I told you," he whispered. I keep my promises. Kamsi looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't see a monster. She saw a man who had done exactly what he said he would do. He had saved the person she loved most. Thank you, she said, her voice choked with sobs. Han didn't say anything. He just pulled her into his arms and let her cry. In that moment, the debt felt smaller. The cage felt wider, and the man who held the key didn't seem so terrifying anymore. But as they walked out of the hospital, Kamsi saw a black car parked across the street. A man was sitting in the driver's seat, watching them. He didn't look like one of Han's men. He looked like someone else. She felt a shiver run down her spine. The election was weeks away. Miller was still out there. And in the world of Han Seung-jun, a victory today only meant a bigger fight tomorrow. Kamsi gripped Han's arm, pulling him closer. She wasn't a puppet anymore. She was a partner, and she was going to make sure they both survived. The black car followed them for 6 blocks, staying just far enough back to be a shadow but close enough to be a threat. Kamsi kept her eyes glued to the side mirror, her heart thumping against her ribs like a trapped bird. The joy she had felt only minutes ago, hearing that her mother was going to live, was being sucked out of her by the sight of that dark, tinted glass behind them. She felt like she was in a movie, but there was no music and the stakes were too real. Han, she whispered, her voice tight, they're still there. Han didn't look back, he didn't even flinch. He was looking at his phone, his thumb sliding across the screen as he typed out messages. But his jaw was set so hard she could see the muscle jumping in his cheek. He reached out with his free hand and gripped the handle above the door. I know, he said. His voice was flat like he was talking about the grocery list. He leaned forward and tapped the driver on the shoulder. Take the long way, go through the industrial district. If they're still on us by the bridge, you know what to do. The driver, a man Kamsi only knew as Lee, nodded once. He didn't say a word. He just turned the steering wheel hard to the right, taking a corner so fast Kamsi was thrown against Han's side. Han didn't push her away. Instead, he wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close and holding her steady. His suit felt expensive and scratchy against her skin, but his body was as solid as a wall. Who are they? Kamsi asked, her breath coming in short gasps. Is it Miller? Did he send them? Miller is a coward, Han said, his eyes finally looking out the back window. He doesn't do his own dirty work. He hires people who don't have names. People who get paid to make things disappear, but he forgot one thing. What? I'm the one who taught those people how to work, Han said. The car sped up, the engine roaring as they raced down a street lined with empty warehouses and rusted fences. The rain was starting again, a light mist that turned the road into a mirror. Behind them, the black car didn't slow down. It kept pace, weaving through the light traffic with a dangerous grace. Suddenly, Lee slammed on the brakes. The tires screamed against the wet asphalt, and the car slid sideways before coming to a dead stop. Kamsi screamed, bracing her hands against the seat in front of her. Before she could ask what was happening, Han was moving. He reached under his seat and pulled out a heavy black handgun. The sound of him cocking it, a sharp, metallic clack echoed in the quiet car. Stay down, Han commanded. He didn't look at her. He opened his door and stepped out into the rain. Kamsi huddled on the floor of the car, her head tucked between her knees. She heard the sound of another car doors slamming. She heard shouting, voices lost in the wind and the rain. Then, the sound she had been dreading, the sharp, popping cracks of gunfire. Pop, pop, top, top. It sounded like firecrackers, but she knew better. She felt the car shake as something hit the trunk. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying to a God she hadn't talked to in years. She thought of her mother, sleeping in that clean hospital bed. She thought of the life she had sold just to keep that heart beating. If she died here, in the back of a Mercedes in a rainy alley, what was it all for? After what felt like an hour but was probably only minutes, the shooting stopped. The silence that followed was even scarier. Kamsi waited, her breath held, until she heard the sound of the car door opening again. She looked up, her eyes wide, expecting to see a stranger with a mask. It was Han. His hair was wet, sticking to his forehead in dark clumps. His suit was ruined, stained with water and something darker that might have been oil or blood. He was breathing hard, but his eyes were calm. He put the gun back under the seat and looked at Kamsi. It's over, he said. Get back on the seat. Kamsi scrambled up, her legs shaking so much she could barely move. She looked out the window. The black car was crashed into a brick wall 50 yards back. Two men were face down on the pavement, their bodies still. She didn't want to look, but she couldn't turn away. Are they dead? She whispered. They're not a problem anymore, Han replied. He looked at Lee. Get us home, now. The rest of the drive was a blur. Kamsi sat in the corner of the seat, as far away from Han as she could get. She looked at him, seeing the man who had just walked into a gunfight like he was going to a board meeting. This was the man she was married to. This was the man she had kissed, a man who dealt in death and didn't even blink when the bullets started flying. If you're sitting on the edge of your seat right now, do not forget to hit that like button. It tells the YouTube algorithm that you want more of this dark, gritty story. Also, I want to hear from you. How would you rate Han's protection so far? Is he a hero for saving her, or is he just protecting his investment? Give me a rating from 1 to 10 in the comments below. And listen to me carefully. If you don't hit that subscribe button for Afro-Korean Love FM right now, you're leaving Kamsi in the middle of a war zone with a man who has blood on his hands. Don't let her face Miller and Han alone. Subscribe now and show your support before the next shot is fired. The estate felt different when they returned. The high stone walls didn't look like a prison anymore, they looked like a fortress. There were more guards at the gate, men with earpieces and long coats that hid their weapons. As they pulled up to the front door, Minna was waiting, her face as cold and hard as the marble floors inside. The house is secure, Mr. Han, she said as they stepped into the foyer. We've swept every room, the perimeter is doubled. Han nodded, stripping off his wet jacket and handing it to her. I want a full report on those men, find out who paid them, I want names by morning. Yes, sir. Han turned to Kamsi. He looked at her, and for a second the hardness in his eyes softened. He reached out to touch her arm, but she flinched away. He let his hand drop, his mouth thinning into a straight line. Go upstairs, Kamsi, he said quietly. Take a hot bath, I'll have food sent to your room. I don't want food, Kamsi said, her voice trembling. I want to know what the hell just happened. You said the interview solved everything. You said we were safe. I said the public was on our side, Han corrected. That doesn't mean my enemies have gone away, it just means they have to be more careful. Tonight was a mistake on their part. They were desperate. Desperate people kill people, Han, Kamsi shouted. Her voice echoed off the high ceilings, making the guards at the door look over. I almost died tonight. My mom is in a hospital with 2 guards outside her door, and I'm living in a house where people get shot in the driveway. Is this what the next 2 years are going to be like? Han stepped closer to her. He didn't look angry, he looked tired. He was older than her, and in this light, with the rain still dripping off him, he looked every bit of his 50-plus years. He looked like a man who had been fighting for a long time and was starting to wonder what he was fighting for. I can't promise you it will be easy, he said, his voice low. But I can promise you that no one will ever get past me to get to you. You are the most important person in this city right now, Kamsi, not just to the voters, to me. Because I'm your puppet, she spat. Because you're the only real thing in my life, he said. He didn't wait for her to respond. He turned and walked into his office, the heavy doors shutting with a final, solid thud. Kamsi stood in the hallway for a long time, the silence of the house pressing in on her. She felt like she was standing on a tightrope, and the wind was picking up. She went upstairs and did exactly what he told her. She soaked in a tub of hot water until her skin was red, trying to wash away the smell of the rain and the sound of the gunshots. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw those men on the pavement. She saw Han with the gun. She realized then that she was changing. A week ago, she would have been crying and screaming for the police. Now, she was just numb. She was starting to accept the violence. She was starting to understand the cold calculation of Han's world. She was becoming one of them. When she finally got out of the bath, there was a tray of food on the table by the bed. Steak, mashed potatoes, and a glass of red wine. She ate it all, her body craving the energy she had burned through. As she finished the wine, she noticed a small envelope tucked under the plate. She opened it. Inside was a single photo. It was a picture of her mother in her hospital room. She was sitting up, a tray of food in front of her, a small smile on her face. On the back of the photo, in sharp, elegant handwriting, were 3 words, "She is safe." Kamsi felt a sob catch in her throat. She clutched the photo to her chest, the tears finally coming. She hated Han. She hated the way he controlled her. She hated the danger he brought into her life. But she couldn't deny that he was keeping his word. She fell asleep with the light on, the photo still clutched in her hand. She woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of the door opening. She didn't move, her heart racing as she watched the shadow move across the room. It was Han. He wasn't wearing his suit anymore. He was in a silk robe, his hair still damp. He didn't come to the bed. He went to the window and stood there, looking out at the dark estate. Kamsi watched him through her eyelashes. He looked lonely. It was a strange thought. How could a man with so much power be lonely? But he looked small against the backdrop of the massive window. He looked like he was carrying the weight of the entire world on his shoulders. "I know you're awake," he said quietly. Kamsi sat up, pulling the blankets to her chin. "What do you want, Han?" "I wanted to make sure you were okay," he said. He didn't turn around. "You didn't eat much of the steak." "I wasn't hungry," she lied. He turned then, the moonlight catching the silver in his hair. "Miller is going to be arrested tomorrow. Not for the kidnapping, but for tax evasion. I had my people dig into his records. He'll be in a cell by noon." Kamsi felt a wave of relief, but it was followed by a sharp pang of fear. If he's in jail, does that mean the danger is over? "One danger is over," Han said, walking toward the bed. He stopped a few feet away, his hands in his pockets. "But there will always be another. That's the nature of this life. People see what I have and they want it. They see you, and they see a way to hurt me." "Why did you choose me, really?" Kamsi asked. "You said you needed a wife for the election, but you could have picked anyone. Why a dropout from the South District? Why me?" Han looked at her for a long time. The silence in the room was heavy, filled with the things they hadn't said. "Because when I saw you in that diner 3 months ago," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "you were the first person who didn't look at me with fear. You looked at me like I was just another man who wanted coffee. You had a light in you, Kamsi, a fire. I wanted that light near me. I thought maybe if I had it, I wouldn't feel so cold." Kamsi stared at him. She saw the truth in his eyes, a raw, naked honesty that she hadn't expected. He didn't just want a wife for the cameras. He wanted her. He had seen her and decided to take her, like everything else in his life. "You're a monster," she said, but there was no bite in it. "I know," he replied. He reached out and touched her cheek. His hand was warm this time, his thumb brushing against her skin with a tenderness that made her heart ache. She didn't pull away. She couldn't. She was tired of fighting. She was tired of being alone. He leaned in, his face inches from hers. "You don't have to love me, Kamsi. You just have to let me take care of you. Let me be the one who stands between you and the dark." He kissed her then, a slow, deep kiss that tasted like wine and secrets. Kamsi closed her eyes and let herself fall into it. She knew it was a mistake. She knew she was losing herself. But in the middle of the night, with the rain tapping against the glass and the shadows dancing on the wall, it was the only thing that felt like it mattered. The next few days were quiet. The news was full of Miller's arrest, and the polls for Han were higher than ever. The Save the Mother story had become a sensation. Kamsi was a hero to the city, and Han was the knight in shining armor who had made it all possible. They went to more events, more dinners, more rallies. Kamsi played her part perfectly. She smiled, she held his hand, she told the stories they wanted to hear. But when the cameras were off, things were different. They shared the master bedroom now. They didn't talk much, but the tension between them had changed. It wasn't just fear and hatred anymore. It was something deeper, something more dangerous. It was a connection born of shared secrets and survived violence. Kamsi visited her mother every day. Her mother was getting stronger, her lungs healing. She asked about Han, and Kamsi told her she was happy. She told her that Han was a good man. She told herself that lie so many times she almost started to believe it. One evening, they were sitting in the library. Han was reading a report, and Kamsi was looking at a book on architecture. The fire was roaring in the hearth, casting a warm, orange glow over the room. "I have something for you," Han said, not looking up. He slid a small box across the table. Kamsi opened it. Inside was a key. "What's this?" she asked. "It's the key to a house in the hills," Han said. "I bought it for your mother. It has a garden and the air is clean. She can move there next week. I've already hired a nurse to live with her." Kamsi looked at the key, then at him. You're really doing it. You're giving her a life. I told you I would, Han said. He finally looked up, his eyes meeting hers. But there's a condition. Kamsi felt her heart sink. What condition? The 2-year contract, Han said. I want to tear it up. Kamsi frowned. You want me to leave? No, Han said, standing up and walking over to her. He took the key from her hand and closed her fingers over it. I want you to stay, not because of a contract, not because of a debt. I want you to be my wife, for real. Kamsi looked at him, her mind racing. You mean, forever? Forever, Han said. I'll give you the $1 million now. I'll give you everything you want, but I want you to choose to stay. I want you to be the woman by my side when I walk into that Senate chamber. I want you to be the one I come home to. Kamsi looked at the key in her hand. She thought about her old life, the tiny apartment, the debt, the fear. She thought about the man standing in front of her, the monster, the savior, the husband. She looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't see the age gap. She didn't see the power. She just saw a man who was asking for something he couldn't take by force. And if I say no, she asked. Han didn't flinch. Then you take your mother, you take the money, and you leave tomorrow. I won't stop you. I won't follow you. You'll be free. Kamsi felt the weight of the choice. It was the ultimate test. Was she a victim, or was she a partner? Was she the girl who had been sold, or the woman who was choosing her own destiny? She looked at Han, seeing the hope and the fear in his eyes. She realized then that she had already made her choice. She had made it in the back of the car during the gunfight. She had made it in the library during the interview. She had made it every time she let him touch her. I'm not going anywhere, she whispered. Han let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a lifetime. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could feel his heart beating against hers. You won't regret it, Kamsi, he murmured into her hair. I swear to you. They stood there in the library, the fire dying down to embers, the shadows growing long. They were an unlikely couple, the student and the Don, the black girl from the streets and the Korean man from the skyscrapers. They were a story of blood and money and dark, twisted love. But as Kamsi leaned her head against his chest, she knew one thing for sure. The cage was gone, the door was open, and she was exactly where she wanted to be. The rain continued to fall outside, washing away the traces of the fight, but inside the stone walls, a new life was beginning. A life that wouldn't be easy and wouldn't be pretty, but it would be theirs. And in the city of Seattle, the name Han Seung-jun would never be spoken the same way again. Because beside him, standing tall and proud, was the woman who had saved him from himself. The story was far from over, but for the first time in her life, Kamsi wasn't afraid of the ending. She was the Don's wife, and she was ready for whatever came next. The morning after Kamsi decided to stay, the estate felt quieter, but it was a heavy kind of quiet. It wasn't the silence of a tomb anymore, it was the silence of a house holding its breath. Kamsi woke up early, the sun hitting the white duvet like a spotlight. She looked at the empty space beside her. The sheets were still warm. Han had already left for a meeting, but he had left something behind on her nightstand. It was a small, velvet box. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a necklace made of black diamonds, dark and cold and beautiful. There was no note. There didn't need to be. It was another piece of the cage, but this time, Kamsi didn't want to throw it against the wall. She put it on, the cold stones resting against her collarbone like a promise. She looked at herself in the mirror. She didn't look like the girl who used to count pennies for bus fare. She looked like a woman who could buy the whole bus line and fire everyone on it. She liked that feeling. It was a dirty, sharp kind of power, and it was starting to feel better than being good ever had. She went downstairs to the dining room, where the table was set for one. Minna was standing by the window, her hands clasped behind her back. She looked at Kamsi, and for the first time, there was something like respect in her eyes, or maybe it was just acknowledgement that Kamsi had survived the first round. Mr. Han expects you at the new house at noon, Minna said. Your mother has been moved. She's waiting for you. Is she okay? Kamsi asked, sitting down to a plate of fruit she didn't really want. She's confused, Minna said bluntly. She doesn't understand why she's in a mansion with a view of the mountains instead of a hospital room. She's been asking for you every 10 minutes. Kamsi pushed her plate away. The guilt hit her like a punch to the gut, but she pushed it down. Guilt was for people who had nothing. She had everything now. She had the Don's protection and the Don's money. She just had to make her mother believe it was all okay. The drive to the hills was long and winding. The trees were thick with pine needles, and the air smelled like damp earth. The house Han had bought for her mother was a small, modern masterpiece made of glass and wood. It was tucked away from the road, hidden by a tall fence and a heavy gate. 2 guards stood at the entrance, their faces blank. Kamsi didn't even look at them as the car pulled through. When she walked into the living room, her mother was sitting in a high-backed chair, a thick wool blanket over her knees. A nurse was standing nearby, but her mother waved her away the moment she saw Kamsi. "Kamsi," she cried out, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "What is this place? Where are we?" Kamsi walked over and knelt by her mother's feet, taking her hands. They were warm and soft, the skin no longer gray. "It's your home, Mom. Han bought it for you. It's safe here. The air is good for your lungs." Her mother looked around the room, her eyes wide. "Kamsi, this isn't right. A house like this. It costs millions, and that man, Han, I saw the news. They're saying he's a criminal. They're saying he took over businesses by force." "The news says a lot of things, Mom," Kamsi said, her voice turning cold. "They say those things because they're afraid of him. He saved you. He paid for the doctors. He's taking care of us." "But at what cost?" her mother whispered, leaning in close. Her eyes searched Kamsi's face, looking for the girl she used to know. "You look different, baby. Your eyes, they're hard, and that necklace. It looks like it belongs on a queen, not my daughter." "I am a queen now, Mom," Kamsi said, and she realized as she said it that she meant it. "I'm Mrs. Han, and as long as I'm his wife, no one can ever hurt us again. We don't have to be scared of the landlord. We don't have to be scared of the rain. Isn't that what you wanted? For me to be safe?" Her mother pulled her hands away, a look of deep sadness crossing her face. "I wanted you to be happy, Kamsi. I didn't want you to sell your soul to a man who uses guns to get what he wants." "I didn't sell it," Kamsi lied, standing up. "I chose this. Now, eat your lunch. The nurse says you need to keep your strength up." She walked out of the house before her mother could say anything else. She couldn't handle the truth today. She got back into the car and told Lee to drive. She didn't want to go back to the estate yet. She wanted to see the city. She wanted to see the people who didn't know her name. They drove through the downtown area, the neon signs starting to flicker to life as the sun began to set. Kamsi watched the people on the sidewalks, students with backpacks, workers in cheap suits, homeless men huddled in doorways. She used to be one of them. She used to be invisible. Now, as the black Mercedes rolled past, people stopped and stared. They didn't see Kamsi. They saw the car. They saw the power. Suddenly, Lee slammed on the brakes. A group of protesters was blocking the street in front of Han's campaign headquarters. They were holding signs that said Han is a hollow man and clean up Seattle, start with Seung-jun. They were screaming and chanting, their faces red with anger. "Keep driving," Kamsi said, her heart starting to race. "I can't, ma'am," Lee said, his hand moving toward the holster under his arm. "The street is blocked. We have to wait for the police." A man in a ragged jacket noticed the car. He pointed a finger and yelled something Kamsi couldn't hear through the glass. Within seconds, the car was surrounded. People were banging on the windows, their faces pressed against the tint. "Gold digger," a woman screamed, her voice muffled but clear. "How much did he pay for you?" "Whore," another voice yelled. Kamsi sat in the middle of the back seat, her hands gripped into fists. She felt the old fear rising up, but then she looked at the black diamonds around her neck. She remembered the gun in Han's hand. She remembered the way the city looked from the top of his skyscraper. She leaned forward and tapped Lee on the shoulder. "Open the window." "Ma'am, that's not a good idea," Lee said, his eyes darting to the crowd. "Open it now." Lee sighed and hit the button. The glass slid down, and the noise of the crowd flooded into the car like a wave. The smell of the street, wet asphalt, cheap cigarettes, and sweat filled the air. The protesters went quiet for a second, shocked that she had actually opened the window. Kamsi looked at the woman who had called her a whore. She was young, maybe 21, with a nose ring and a tired expression. "What did you say to me?" Kamsi asked, her voice low and dangerous. The woman flinched, but she didn't back down. "I said you're a sellout. You're marrying a man who's destroying this city just so you can wear pretty clothes." Kamsi leaned out the window, her eyes like flint. You think you know me? You think you know my life? I spent 20 years being nobody. I watched my mother nearly die because we couldn't afford a heater. Where were you then? Where were your signs and your chanting when we were being tossed into the street? The crowd was silent now, listening. Han Seung-jun is the only person who looked at me and saw a human being, Kamsi continued, her voice rising. He's the only one who did anything, so you can call me whatever you want. You can hate him all you want. But while you're standing out here in the rain, I'm the one who's making sure my family survives. Now, get the fuck out of my way. She sat back and nodded to Lee. Lee didn't wait. He revved the engine, the loud roar of the Mercedes making the protesters jump back. He pushed through the crowd, the car bumping against a few bodies, but nobody tried to stop them this time. Kamsi watched them in the rearview mirror until they were just small, angry dots in the distance. She felt a rush of adrenaline so strong it made her dizzy. She had stood up to them. She had defended her life. She had defended him. When she got back to the estate, Han was waiting for her in the library. He was sitting in his usual chair, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked up as she walked in, his eyes scanning her face. I heard about the protest, he said. Lee called it in. You shouldn't have opened the window, Kamsi. I had to, she said, walking over to the fire to warm her hands. I'm tired of being the girl who hides in the back of the car. If I'm going to be your wife, I'm going to be your wife. I'm not going to let them talk to me like I'm trash. Han stood up and walked over to her. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was soft, but his eyes were burning. You have a lot of fire in you, Kamsi. It's a dangerous thing, but I like it. He pulled her into his arms, his scent wrapping around her like a blanket. Kamsi leaned into him, her head against his chest. She could hear his heart beating, slow and steady. Tomorrow is the final rally, Han said into her hair. After that, the election is over. Once I'm in the Senate, things will change. We won't have to hide anymore. We'll be the ones who make the rules. And Miller, Kamsi asked. Miller is a memory, Han said. He'll spend the next 10 years in a cage. He won't bother us again. Kamsi nodded. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that the danger was over. But as she looked into the fire, she saw the faces of the protesters. She saw the hate in their eyes. She knew that power didn't make enemies go away, it just made them quieter. The next day, the rally was held at a massive arena in the center of the city. Thousands of people were there, a sea of suits and flags. Kamsi stood backstage, watching through a curtain as Han spoke. He was brilliant. He talked about the future, about strength, about a city that belonged to the people. He didn't look like a lone shark. He looked like a leader. And now, Han said, his voice echoing through the speakers, I want to introduce the woman who has been my strength through all of this. My wife, Kamsi. Kamsi took a deep breath and stepped out onto the stage. The lights were so bright she couldn't see the faces in the crowd, but the noise was deafening. Thousands of people were cheering her name. She walked over to Han, and he took her hand, lifting it into the air. In that moment, Kamsi felt like she was flying. She felt like she had finally made it. The poor girl from the diner was gone. The dropout was gone. There was only Mrs. Han. But as they walked off the stage, a man in a maintenance uniform stepped out from behind a stack of crates. He was holding something in his hand, something small and black. Han, the man yelled. Everything happened in slow motion. Kamsi saw the man raise his hand. She saw the glint of metal. She didn't think. She didn't scream. She threw herself in front of Han, her body a shield for the man she had come to love. The sound of the shot was like a thunderclap in the small space. Kamsi felt a sharp, burning pain in her shoulder, like a hot iron had been pressed against her skin. She stumbled back, the world spinning. She saw Han catch her, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. Kamsi, he roared. She heard more shots, 3, 4, 5. She heard screaming. She heard the sound of feet running, but it all felt far away. She looked up at Han, her vision starting to blur. I got you, she whispered, her voice sounding like it was coming from underwater. Stay with me, Han screamed, his hands pressing against her shoulder trying to stop the blood. Don't you dare leave me, Kamsi. Do you hear me? Stay with me. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was Han's face. He wasn't the Don anymore. He wasn't the politician. He was just a man, terrified and broken, holding the only thing he cared about. And for Kamsi, that was enough. She woke up in a white room. The air smelled like bleach and medicine. For a second, she thought she was back in the old hospital with her mother, but then she felt the soft silk of the sheets and the heavy weight of the diamond ring on her finger. She tried to move, but her shoulder exploded in pain. She let out a small groan. "Don't move," a voice said. She turned her head slowly. Han was sitting in a chair by the bed. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His clothes were wrinkled, his face was covered in gray stubble, and his eyes were bloodshot. "You're awake," he said, his voice cracking. He stood up and moved to the side of the bed, taking her hand. His grip was so tight it hurt, but she didn't care. "Did we win?" she asked, her voice a raspy whisper. Han let out a dry, shaky laugh. "Yes, Kamsi, we won. I'm the senator-elect, but I almost lost everything that mattered." "The man." "Dead," Han said, his voice turning cold. "He was one of Miller's guys, a fanatic who thought he was a hero. He'll never hurt anyone again." Kamsi closed her eyes, a wave of relief washing over her. She was alive. Han was safe. Her mother was safe. "You saved me," Han whispered, leaning down to press his forehead against hers. "Why did you do it? You could have let me take the hit. You could have been free." Kamsi opened her eyes and looked at him. She saw the man she had sold herself to, the man she had fought, and the man she had finally chosen. "Because I'm a Han," she said, a small, weak smile touching her lips. "And we take care of our own." Han didn't say anything. He just leaned in and kissed her, a soft, lingering kiss that tasted like tears and triumph. The 2 years were just the beginning. The contract was long gone, but the bond was stronger than ever. They were a team now, a senator and his wife, a Don and his queen. As the sun rose over the rainy city of Seattle, Kamsi looked out the window of her private suite. She knew there would be more enemies. She knew there would be more fights, but she wasn't afraid. She had found her place in the world. It was a dark, gritty, dangerous place, but it was hers. And as long as she was by Han's side, she knew she would never be invisible again.